Aloha BIOCHEM 141. This is our first lecture, and today we begin Chapter 1, Matter and Measurement. And in this lecture we discuss matter and how to classify it by naturally occurring or synthetic substance. So here's Janice Smith's Chapter 1 in the textbook. This is the cover page, Matter and Measurement. You can see a picture of a baby. The baby is being weighed on a scale. So the baby is a form of matter, a type of material, makes up the baby, and the baby is being measured, more specifically being weighed. 9 pounds, 2.4 ounces, so a little on the hefty side, but nice looking baby. Looks like it's crying. Here's the outline for the chapter. We'll cover all these topics in several videos. In today's video, we'll pretty much get through section 1.1. So this is an introductory video in which we introduce the course, the main parts, and we get just a tad bit into chemistry and so let's begin. I've written a set of notes to cover the material, and I will upload these notes to our course webpage on LaLima. Chapter 1 does go into matter and measurement. Matter, this is the physical material around us. All of the stuff that we see, feel, taste, etc. Matter is defined as anything that has mass. You can weigh it. You can weigh how many grams it is, and it takes up a certain amount of volume. You can figure out how many liters of space that it occupies. So matter is anything with these two properties. It can be weighed, and it takes up a certain amount of space. A measurement, this is simply a numerical piece of data which describes matter. There's lots of different types of matter. We can list millions of examples, but here are a few. A pile of dirt. So here's a pile of dirt on a table or on the floor. So you have this pile of dirt right there. Dirt has a certain amount of mass. So suppose that this pile of dirt weighs 874 grams, and it occupies a certain amount of space. So maybe if you take this dirt and you pour it into a container, you can see that it occupies 0.716 liters. So these are the measurements describing the mass and the amount of space that the dirt occupies. So therefore, this is matter. It can be weighed and it takes up space. Another example is a beaker of water. A beaker is like a chemistry cup. If you want to get some liquid quickly, then you grab a beaker. So a beaker of water, the water weighs 350 grams, it has mass, and it occupies 0.350 liters of space. So it takes up volume. Water is also matter. Third example is a cat. Maybe you recognize this cat. I surely do. This is a heavy cat. It weighs 10,000 grams. That's also 10 kilograms. So 10,000 grams, quite heavy cat, and it occupies a lot of space, 22 liters of space. So this is the cat Garfield. If you know who Garfield is, Garfield's a fat cat because he eats a lot of lasagna. So it has mass, occupies space, so the cat is matter. The fourth example, a breath of air. I don't know how to draw a breath of air, but maybe that looks like a breath of air, a little poof of smoke or something. So air can actually be weighed. You can weigh air by taking an empty gas cylinder, you put it on a scale, you figure out how much it weighs, and then when you inject a certain amount of air and you weigh it again, the difference between the two weights tells you how much the air inside weighs. So here, a breath of air, suppose it weighs 6.1 grams. So it has mass, and it occupies a pretty large volume, 5.0 liters. So mass and volume, air is matter. Then the last example that we take a look at is a tiny molecule of water. Now, water is a substance. Here we're talking about a beaker of water. Well, a molecule of water is the smallest particle of water. We'll talk later about terms like atoms and molecules and ions and stuff, but water is made of tiny particles and we call them water molecules. So this is a representation of a water molecule. A water molecule is one oxygen atom connected to two hydrogen atoms at the same time in this triangular shape. So we also call water H2O for the two hydrogens and the one oxygen, H2O. A tiny water molecule actually does have mass. It weighs 0.0000, lots of zeros, 299 grams. So it hardly weighs anything, but it does have a tiny bit of mass. And it does occupy a tiny bit of space, 0.00, lots of zeros, 299 liters. So a molecule of water is matter because it has mass and it takes up volume. You might think that everything that you see around you is matter, and you'd be hard pressed to take a look around and find an example of something that isn't matter. But perhaps you could. And maybe if you consider light, scientists argue that it is massless. So perhaps light is not matter. And other things that you might not think of, like ideas. An idea isn't matter. It cannot be weighed, take up space. So when you think in terms outside the box of stuff that you're not really sensing with your hands, you might think of some things that are not matter. But if it's matter, it can be weighed and it occupies a certain amount of space. In this chapter, we organize matter into different types. There's lots of different types of material around us. There's lots of examples of material, lots of matter around us. In order to make sense of all this chaos, we organize it into different types. You got this type of matter, you got that type of matter, and you got that type of matter. And that's what we do in science. If you want to make sense of something, first start with how do you organize that something? How do you put it into different categories? So we'll do that. We'll organize matter into different categories. And we will discuss the different types of measurements and how to properly use them. So once we organize matter into different categories of matter, this type, that type, that type, we will then talk about the measurements that we use to describe those examples of matter. You know, the mass, the volume, the density, the temperature. Lots of different measurements can be used to describe matter. Now, I should note that matter is categorized into different types depending on how you want to do it. There are different ways to categorize matter, and it depends on who's doing the categorizing. So we'll discuss 3 different ways to categorize matter in Chapter 1. In this video, we'll just talk about the first way. So hang on one moment. Before we get to that, and before we get much further, we might as well go ahead and define what chemistry and biochemistry are. Chemistry is defined as the study of matter, its composition, properties, and transformations. What it's made of, the stuff that it's made of, how it behaves, what are some properties of it, and how does it change, its transformations. So chemistry is the study of material, what it's made of, its properties, and how it changes. And biochemistry is the part of chemistry that involves living organisms. Chemistry is a very big subject. all of the material around us, when you study it, its composition, properties, and transformations, that's a large subject. And chemistry interfaces with pretty much every other science out there. So chemistry is called, because of that, the central science. It's hard to draw a line between chemistry and biology, or between chemistry and physics, between chemistry and geology. It touches virtually all areas of science. And biochemistry is really a specialized part of chemistry, the part that involves living organisms. So in order to study biochemistry, we need to study chemistry and apply it to living organisms. So in this class, we go through quite a lot. We study chemistry, and everywhere we get a chance, we apply it to living organisms. So again, when you study matter, it's good to begin with categorizing matter into different types. So how do you classify matter? I like to make an analogy here. Suppose you have 10,000 pieces of paper, and you want to categorize all of those pieces of paper into different types. You have this type of paper, that type of paper, and that type of paper. Well, there's different ways to do that. And one secretary might divide the papers into different categories by their color. You have red pieces of paper, yellow pieces of paper, white pieces of paper, and maybe the white pieces of paper would contain more pieces than the other ones. But another secretary might categorize the papers by their content. You have financial documents, health documents, etc. So by their content. And there's probably a lot of other ways to categorize paper that you come across. Well, likewise, all of the material around us can be divided into categories in different methods. And the first method is pretty simple. It's by how it was formed. So here is all of the matter in the world. It can be divided into two categories if it's naturally occurring or synthetic. Humans are not involved in making it, or they are involved in making it. Everything can be placed in one of these two categories. Here are some examples of some naturally occurring material. An apple, a leaf, a piece of bark, sucrose. That's actually table sugar, and you find sucrose in lots of fruits and vegetables and sugar cane like we have here in Hawaii. So sucrose is all over the place. It grows naturally. Penicillin. Penicillin is actually an antibacterial drug discovered a long time ago, and it's extracted from mold. So that moldy table in your basement, there might be some penicillin in there that you could extract out of it. So it's naturally occurring. Another example is salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is a substance which is extracted from plant sources like white willow bark, taro, coffee. Lots of other plants contain this, and it can be extracted out of those plants, and it's used in skin treatment. It's used for all kinds of purposes. Here is a representation of a molecule of salicylic acid, so that the smallest particle of salicylic acid. We'll talk later about tiny particles, but here is a representation of it. And when you look at this, after a few chapters, you will be able to decipher this and tell me that this molecule has 7 carbon atoms, 6 hydrogens, and 3 oxygens. So maybe you can see the 3 oxygens, but what about the other ones? So we'll talk about how to decipher molecules like this later. But salicylic acid is a naturally occurring substance, and that you find all over the place. Now, other types of material are synthetic. People are involved in making it. An example is plastic, rubber, steel, acetyl salicylic acid, which is aspirin. Now, acetyl salicylic acid is a painkiller which is derived from this naturally occurring substance, salicylic acid. So it's derived from that and acetic anhydride, or acetic acid. One way to make aspirin is to simply take salicylic acid and you mix it with a little bit of vinegar, and then you can make some of this stuff, acetyl salicylic acid. And here's a molecule of acetyl salicylic acid. And looking at this structure, the formula is C9H8O4. So those are all of the atoms in this molecule. And again, we'll talk about molecules and structures like this later. But this is a synthetic substance. It's not very hard to make, only one more. You take this naturally occurring salicylic acid, you add a little bit of vinegar, and you get this. And I wonder if, what if a horse were to walk by, a coffee plant, and then, grab a bunch of coffee leaves which contain this substance, and then trot on down the pathway, and then drop it into a pile of grapes which are sitting there fermenting on the ground, which contain some vinegar. And so the coffee leaves would mix with the vinegar, and maybe some of the salicylic acid would combine with some of the vinegar to form some of this acetyl salicylic acid. Would that be synthetic since it didn't involve a human? I don't know, kind of hard to decide. But for the most part, to get this aspirin would require human intervention. Your author has an example in the textbook, figure 1.2. The substance on the left, this white sticky substance, latex, is a naturally occurring substance that oozes out of rubber trees when you stick them with a pipe. So just like you get maple syrup out of a tree, and you turn it, maple sap you turn into syrup. Latex, you also get it out of trees, out of a rubber tree. So you get this sticky white sap. It's not very useful right away, but with a simple process called vulcanization, in which you mix this latex sap with a sulfur containing substance, you can convert the latex into this rubbery material, which is used to form latex gloves. So latex gloves is made of synthetic material, but it's very easy to convert natural material into synthetic material sometimes, like this, and like aspirin. So that's the first way that you can categorize matter into different types. So in our next video, we will discuss the second method of categorizing matter, the states of matter. So go ahead and check that out, and I will see you next time.